we're going to get an alternate, we have an opportunity here for happy dreams, because the title of Laura's talk is Visions of Sugar Plums. Laura Whittenton needs probably not much introduction, because she's a very active member of this Oasis community, and because she is going to be ushering in a new Oasin into the world at some point in the not too when
end of March.
End of March-ish. Yeah, she's going to be bringing a new Oasin into our midst. We have a chair ready for her, so just in case she doesn't want to stand for her whole presentation. But Laura works at the Houston Ballet, specifically in the costume studio, and she has prepared a talk that she's suggested this. I thought this sounds great, especially this time of year. Should be utterly fascinating. Let's give a warm welcome to Laura Whittenton.
So yeah, as Mike said, I'm about 5 months pregnant, so if I just decide to sit down at some point, I'll keep going, but you just won't be able to see me. Okay, as Mike said, I work in the Houston Ballet wardrobe department, and we've recently opened a brand new production of the Nutcracker. And this is kind of a big deal for us because we had been doing a production of the Nutcracker. We've been doing the same one since 1987. 29 years. Sets were 29 years old, the costume was 29 years old, the choreography was 29 years old. And I've seen it twice. It was a beautiful production. It was designed by one of my favorite costume designers. Oh my gosh, and his name is blanking right now, who fittingly passed away just as we closed our last performances of the Nutcracker. So I wanted to talk to you a little bit about what goes into making the costumes for ballet, and what you can expect if you go see our brand new production. Just a little back history for the Houston Ballet. It was founded in 1955. I should get my notes. By Tatiana Semenova as a dance school. She was a former ballet dancer with the Ballet Russe in Russia. Later, that academy was turned into a professional company in 1969 by Nina Popova, also a former ballet dancer with the Ballet Russe. And Popova also danced for American Ballet Theater in New York City for a while. Currently, the Houston Ballet is the 4th largest professional dance company in the United States. And this is measured by the size of our company, which is 58 dancers. We have the largest financial endowment of any dance company in the United States. It's $55 million. And this endowment means that we can produce huge productions with lavish sets and costumes. I cannot express how lucky I am to be able to do this in Houston versus having similar budgets and productions but working in New York City or Los Angeles. Because I lived in New York for 9 months and I don't really want to do it again, especially with a new baby. The budget for our new Nutcracker was $5 million. This is our downtown location. It was built in 2011. It's currently the largest dance facility for ballet in the US. It holds 9 rehearsal studios, a black box performance space, all of the company's offices, and this is my favorite part. The entire second floor is dedicated to our wardrobe studio, and a small room for our shoes, but mainly our wardrobe studio. And it's one of the few rooms I've had the opportunity to work in my career that was built as a costume shop, because usually, especially if you're working in smaller regional theaters, your costume shop is an old utility closet or somewhere in the basement. And it's a cave and you kind of go in there and lose track of time. Ours has a huge workroom. It has custom fitting rooms, offices, fabric storage, electrical outlets set in the middle of the floor specifically for setting up rows of industrial sewing machines. And our entire wall of windows looks out over Buffalo Bayou and Sesquicentennial Park, so I'm very happy there. The ballet is still an academy as well as a company. Our academy students are, they range in age from 4 to 19. The older ones are part of what we call HB2, and they are training for professional careers as ballet dancers. They'll go on either to dance with our professional company. About 40% of our company is made up of previous Houston Ballet Academy members, or they'll go on to careers with other dance companies around the world, because it is an international dance school. We have students from all over the world. They come to Houston specifically to train at the Ben Stevenson Ballet Academy. And one thing that is very different between our old Nutcracker and our new Nutcracker is that our artistic director created 100 roles specifically for the Ballet Academy students. And for this show, I fit children as young as the age of 7 in costumes. They're adorable. They're lambs and bumblebees and tiny ballerinas. They're so cute. So I'm going to go through the process right now of how a brand new ballet goes from just an idea in a choreographer's head to an onstage production. And I'm going to be talking just mainly about the costumes because I had to take a dance class in college and that's about all I know about choreography. So the first thing is that the choreographer, in our case, this is Stanton Welch, he's the artistic director of our company, has a meeting with the costume designer. And this is our costume designer. His name is Tim Goodchild. He's from London. If you saw the movie, it was made in the 1970s, The Little Prince, starred Ben Vereen as the snake, and Gene Wilder played the fox. Those are Tim's costumes. He doesn't do many movies. He does mainly shows in London's West End. This is, I think, only his second ballet, so it was a learning experience for him too. And Tim also designed the costumes and the sets. So I think the only visual elements of this ballet he did not design were the lighting, and we also use a lot of projections on the set to make magic look like it's happening, and we brought in a separate designer for that. But unlike theater, unlike opera, ballet has no script, has no libretto. So the choreographer and the designer have to sit down, and the choreographer has to communicate everything that he intends to communicate through dance to the designer. The characters, what their personalities are going to be like, the plot, the mood that he's going to be trying to create in each scene. And Stanton and Tim had some of these meetings sitting at a cutting table in the middle of the costume shop, which kind of blew me away because this was over a year ago, and the company was being kind of tight-lipped about what the new ballet was going to incorporate, and here they are in the middle of the costume shop, and all of us are working around them, and we all kind of pulled out our earbuds and leaned in a little and listened to what they were talking about. And Stanton described dancing teddy bears, bulls, lions, frogs, foxes, and he described a much more, I don't want to say complicated, but interesting storyline than our old Nutcracker. In our old Nutcracker, it's the Stahlbaum family has a party, and Clara gets a gift of a Nutcracker, and then that Nutcracker comes to life, and then there's a battle scene between the Nutcracker and an army of rats. And then she goes off to the Kingdom of Sweets and kind of sits passively the entire second act and watches what they call the diverts, which are different little dances that are supposed to be from countries all over the world happen. And in this Nutcracker, the party scene was going to be a little more detailed. There's going to be more going on. Clara wasn't going to be played by an Academy member. She was going to be played by a principal ballerina. And she'd have a much more active role in the second act. She would be more involved in the storyline instead of a passive observer. So as I listened to this meeting, I got very excited because I knew that everything they were describing was going to mean very interesting projects for myself and all of my coworkers. So after this meeting, the designer goes away and they do some research before they begin sketching, because very few costume designers pull images directly from their imaginations. Almost every single costume you see, especially if it's based in history, is going to have several seeds of research that go into creating that costume, and it can be historical research. It can be, in Tim's case, he had a lot of pictures of frogs and butterflies and lambs and bulldogs and foxes, just so he could look at the actual animal in creating the sketches for the fantasy animals. A lot of high concept fashion photography. I don't know where they find these pictures. I think they all subscribe to the same magazine. That's just, when I see them, it doesn't look like a fashion image that's really selling anything. It's just this beautiful fantasy shot, and designers have ripped out pages of magazines all the time that they're sketching from. So after the designer collects all these ideas, he'll sit down and he'll start sketching and painting. And for each character, he'll create a rendering. And this rendering then becomes the blueprint for myself as the technician and the shopping list for the designer and the costume shop manager. So on one rendering, you can see where our shop manager has gone in and just itemized everything that is going to make up this costume. We're going to need purple lurex. We're going to need some sort of off-white fabric with a gold shimmer to it. We're going to need buttons, and then you're going to count up the buttons in that rendering and figure out how they're placed. We're going to need to find a pair of yellow boots. We don't make boots at the ballet, we have to purchase those. A pair of white gloves, again, we're going to purchase those. So it's a shopping list as well. And I want to emphasize at this time that there's a lot of job specialization in costume production. I'm not a designer. Each production just has one costume designer and dozens of other people with different job specialties that make the costumes. And once the show opens, again, another entire crew of people that work backstage to care for and organize the costumes during the run of the show. So at our shop, we have a costume shop manager. They organize everything. They schedule fittings and meetings. They shop fabrics. They make sure that the technicians in the workroom have all the fabrics and trims and notions and functioning equipment. They act as a liaison between different departments of the ballet, such as the props department, stage management, lighting designer. Then there's my job. My official title is cutter draper, and that means that if the designer is the architect, then I'm the engineer. I'm the one who makes the blueprints, or who takes that drawing and then turns it into an actual pattern that can then be cut out of fabric and put together and looks like the drawing. And I lead an entire team of stitchers, which is exactly what it sounds like. Their main job is sewing. They do both machine and hand sewing to put things together. We also have a painter dyer, and their job is they dye fabric and they paint fabric, and they paint anything else we need painting. So we dye a lot of lycras and silks, and sometimes it's just a solid color. You'll dunk the whole thing in a vat. Sometimes it's painted into, or you'll do like a tie-dye technique if you want something more interesting. Craftspersons, we don't have a dedicated craftsperson in our costume shop, but for this production, a lot of our costume crafts, which are things like masks and hats, and in this case, really large animal heads, were made by Robert Alsop and Associates in London. And you've all probably seen Robert's work if you've seen X-Men, Doctor Who. I think he worked on the new Star Wars. I know he's done some stuff for the Harry Potter movies. He's super talented, and during the last month of our build, he came to Houston and worked in our costume shop for the final push to get things done. And then there are dressers. These are people that work backstage during the show. Before performances, they make sure all the costumes are in the right dressing rooms, that everything is, like sometimes a dancer will have to change clothes really quickly and they don't have time to go downstairs to the dressing room and then come back upstairs. So they'll do it in the wings. Dressers assist with that. And after the show, they make sure that the clothes are laundered and that anything that happened to the costumes that needs to be addressed, like rips or snaps falling off or trim coming loose, gets repaired before the next show. So, given all that explanation, here's how my job is done. Before I start cutting into really expensive fabric, I'll do a practice. It's called a mock-up. And we'll make mock-ups out of cheaper fabrics like muslin or canvas. And I'm mainly going to show you pictures from the character I built called, she's a Danish woman. You'll see her in Act 2. And this had an interesting, like I said, Tim didn't have much experience with ballet, and he wanted this to be a tutu, but he wanted the front completely flat, which is not something that a tutu is. Tutus are round, they're the same width all the way around. They're supported by like a little hula hoop on the inside. This one he wanted flat in the front, sticking out in the back, sticking out on the sides. And this was for a principal dancer, so it was a heavy dancing role. And if I was gonna make this for an opera or a theater production or a movie, I'd make something called bucket panniers, which are like these, they look like buckets. They're made out of hooping and fabric, and you sort of wear them on the side of your body. But that would interfere with the dancing, so I had to come up with another solution, which was rows and rows of net with plastic crinoline strips sewn at the bottom. And this was the first step in the process, which was, like, I gathered them on to the panty, what would normally be the tutu panty. I just didn't do any rows in the front. And then I started sort of pleating and controlling and tacking everything, so it eventually took this shape, or pointing to my laptop, and you can't see my laptop. This shape here and this shape on the side, but you'll see it goes out on the sides, out on the back, completely flat in the front. And it's soft, and there's nothing in there like a hoop. So if she partners with another dancer, they're not gonna get stabbed, which dancers tend to like. And then after I've done a practice, a mock-up, I'll start cutting into the real fabric and we'll have a fitting. This is the dress. It's still in progress. It doesn't have all of its trim yet. And I'll work with my stitching team to build this, where I'll make the patterns. I'll cut mostly everything out, but then I pass it off to someone else to stitch together. And among my team of stitchers, I usually work with about a team of 3 to 4 people, because I'm building more than one costume per show. I'll designate the one that has the most experience as my first hand, and that means that they'll help me with the cutting. They may help me with some of the patterning, and I make sure that they know everything I know about what we're building and how it needs to be built, so that if I'm sick or if I'm hit by a bus, my team can continue to work without me, because deadlines are super important in the performing arts. You can't call everybody who bought a ticket and say, hey, can you come over a week later? We're running sort of behind. And then this is a photo I snapped backstage. The dancer is Allison Miller. And one reason I wanted to get a picture of this before it had a dress rehearsal is weight is extremely important in ballet costumes. And this had 4 layers of net, 3 layers of tulle, 1 layer of that pink and white lace, and then that blue and silver fabric, plus all those flowers on top of it. And at several points during her choreography, she has to get up on one foot and spin. And they tell me that when the dress is too heavy and they do that, it literally feels like someone is grabbing it and pulling on it while you're trying to spin. So after this dress rehearsal, I came back to the shop and I cut a layer out. I just opened everything up, put it on my table, took a really sharp pair of scissors and but I wanted to get a picture while it was completely fluffy. It still is mostly this fluffy, it's just a little more compact and not as heavy, and she can dance much better in it. But that was why I took a picture backstage instead of waiting for the production photos. I've seen the production photos, it still looks great, but not quite that voluminous. And it was so big that while she's dancing, I'm standing backstage in the wings during dress rehearsal, and all the other dancers are back there going, "That thing is so big." Like, it's huge. And she's got this giant wig on too, with lights in her face. And so one challenge that we always have to meet with costuming for the ballet is you have to put something like this on and then go out and do a very athletic performance in it. So sacrifices to the design often have to be made. So this is our last minute panda. And sometimes things go wrong backstage, and one thing that went wrong was, as I mentioned, Robert Alsop built a lot of great stuff in London for us, and then it had to be shipped to the US, and part of shipping things internationally is it has to sit in customs in a box for a long time at the airport. And in the Nutcracker, at the party scene, all the children are given these dolls, and each one represents a different country that you're going to see later on in Act 2. So we've got a Spanish bull and a Russian bear and a Danish fox. And the box that the panda doll was in sat in customs at the airport for 2 weeks. We got it after we had started dress rehearsals. We opened up the box and someone had stolen the panda doll right out of the box. They had also stolen a couple of collars for our blizzards, but those we could put together with local stuff a little easier. The panda doll, that was a little harder. So this doll, if you look at his clenched fist and those really square shoulders, this is a Superman doll that's been spray painted black. And we severed the head of a stuffed panda bear and glued it on top and then made a costume for it really quick. And it's funny when you see it standing in the group because it's a whole head taller than all the other dolls, and it's just this panda head sticking out. And I wish I had a picture of it before we got it dressed because it was a Superman, a panda bear head. And things always go wrong. They always go wrong at the last minute, and sometimes they have hilarious results. Other things that didn't show up on time, at least for dress rehearsal, was there's a guy that plays a dog in the first act, and his dog costume just wasn't coming, and it wasn't coming, and it wasn't coming. So finally we borrowed a similar dog costume from the alley just for our dress rehearsal process. And then other things like the suits for the party fathers in the first scene also weren't showing up. So we happened to have this whole other Nutcracker sitting in stock, and we just pulled some suits out of it that would work, and they went on stage. Another thing that happened was we had several of the men's tailoring, or a lot of the men's tailoring done in New York, and it was done by a tailor who, again, hadn't done a lot of ballet. So we got stuff in for a little character called the Nutcracker Prince, and didn't fit. He looked like he was just packed into it. He couldn't lift his arms, and doing this motion, really important for men in dance, especially if you're holding another person right here while you're doing that. So in a week, I made 4 jackets. And what we did was we just went out, we found some fabric that was similar. I pulled a couple of patterns from stock and modified them, and myself and my first hand spent a week just putting 4 jackets together, because each prince wears 2 jackets. There are 5 men playing the prince in a rotating role, and you have to do that with dancers because you can't have one person dance the lead every single night for the entire 39 performances. They'll get exhausted. So you have to rotate dancers in and out. So yeah, slapped together 4 jackets. And then here I just have a couple of production shots and process photos. I made the dresses for the grandmothers in the party scene, and one thing, Tim found this black and white lace fabric in New York that he loved, but he didn't want to use it as it was. So that picture all the way on the left is just half of the grandmother's skirt. My first hand and I spent a solid week just sewing diamonds onto silk chiffon, taking turns, because one of us would get to a point where we'd go, I can't do this anymore, and we'd switch. But he also wanted the trim incorporated in other places. And this is what I'll usually do with a designer for trim. I'll just bring him over to the form and we'll start pinning stuff on it. And then so I have a record of how to put it together. A week and a half later, I'll take a picture with my phone and just pull that picture up. Cameras on phones have really done a lot for costume production. These are some of our tutus in progress. If you look at the rack, on the right side of the rack, you'll see one that just looks kind of deflated. That's the first step. The second step is that, like I said, we'll put a hoop through the tutu and then steam it and tack it, and eventually you can sort of see the underside of the tutu on the top. That it all gets controlled and tacked together. And then my favorite part of tutus is the top plate, because that's where you get to have fun with your trim. The top plate on the top is for the ballerinas, and they're played by our very young Academy girls who are about this big, and they're so cute. And the bottom is the Sugar Plum Fairy top plate, and we just sort of cut the disc, we decorate it, and then when it goes on the tutu, you cut a hole in it, you just slide it in there and hand stitch it around the base. Here's one of our principals, Karina Gonzalez, is the Sugar Plum Fairy. You see the top plate in process, and then here it is on a costume. A lot of other technology that's been really helpful in costume production is laser cutting and 3D printing. These crowns were created by Travis Halsey, who has a production studio in New York. And what he'll do for crowns is he'll laser cut. You know when you go to Burger King and you get that cardboard crown? It's kind of the same idea, except this is laser cut in leather or metal, and then he forms it into a circle. And I think this is so cute. He sends them to his mother to do the beading, and she just kind of sits in front of the TV and just covers them in sparkles. These are some of the masks made by Robert Alsop. The top shelf is our rat army. The white is the cavalry and the infantry for the battle scene. We've got a teddy bear there. And here are some pictures of the costumes on stage. This is Clara in the middle, flanked by her grandparents. I made the black and green ensemble that Barbara Bears is wearing. And that's the dog costume that sat at customs for a while that finally got here. More of the party. You can see the use of the Academy children sitting in the front row. And you can see the last minute panda doll, sort of in the center right behind one of those girls. You can see there's the coat right here. Yeah. This is the second act when this series of dances is called the Diverts, and it happens in the Kingdom of the Sweets, and there's a French dance and a Russian dance and a not a Swedish dance. What else? What other countries? English, Danish, of course. And this is the French one, and you can definitely tell that the Frenchman's costume was inspired by paintings of Louis XIV. And this is our French frog with the head made by Robert Alsop. And in the back, those cats are guards in the sugar court. And here's really only half of what's going on stage in this scene. This is the battle scene between the Nutcracker's army and the rats. And I really wish they had pulled out and also gotten a picture of the rats, because they're really cool. You saw the heads, and then they have these big, ugly, hairy bodies and samurai armor. They're so cool. as I said, Clara was featured more in the second act, and this is Melanie Minetti, one of our principals. She actually, instead of just watching the flower waltz this time, dances in the flower waltz, and this is her costume. And I hope we finish with enough time for questions, because questions are one of my, especially when I do career day at Sam School,
I'm going to
favorite part.
grab the mic, and then we'll go around. Yeah, we can do a few questions. Okay, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, everybody. No, okay. I'll start with Josh and move over this way, and we'll get to them.
So I know you said that you're not part of the dancing side, but I was just wondering if you could give me a little bit more insight onto the academy, because like I was an athlete myself, and like so when we talk about like I was a soccer player, even for the Houston Dynamo, we have an academy where they recruit kids very early on. They go live in residence, they train and stuff with the idea to eventually make the Dynamo team.
Yes.
And then they've got a career where usually you can play until maybe your early 30s. So I was wondering if you could expand a little bit on what is the development process for a ballet dancer, and how long a career can somebody have for such a physically demanding kind of thing like that?
Okay, that is a great question, because I think this is really interesting. Obviously, the kids that we have in our academy classes at the age of 4, we're not thinking of making them professionals just yet. And that's why we have the academy divided into the Houston Ballet Academy and Houston Ballet 2. Basically, what happens is child has an interest in ballet and will begin dancing. In order to really get to the point where you can be a professional, you have to start training at about the age of 7. And once they get, and then you can do that in almost any city, local ballet schools, but once they get to a certain point where their skill has advanced so far that if you were in any city that didn't have an academy like ours that trains professionals, then you have to start looking for another teacher, either a private teacher or a professional ballet academy. And this year, we sent a student named Madison Young to a competition called the Prix de Lausanne. She's from Utah. She relocated to Houston when she was 14, specifically to study at our academy. She's this year been made part of the company. And yeah, we have dormitories on the 6th floor of our building, and the kids live there. They go to school online mainly, and they start training as professionals when they're about 15, 16 years old. They'll start their careers at about the age of 18 or 19. And dancers are dancing now longer than they used to. It used to be that you retired around the age of 30. We definitely have professionals in our company who are closer to 40. They'll dance until physically they can't anymore. They usually injure themselves at least every other season. One of our principals, Connor Walsh, broke his ankle on opening night and finished the show. But someone else is going in for him. We have a gym on the 4th floor of our building where the dancers go and we have a trainer and a physical therapist and a masseuse on staff. And yeah, they go in for a physical every year to make sure they're healthy enough to start the season. So it's physically intense.
They're athletes.
Yeah, and I have to make especially the men's clothing differently. Like this seam right here where your sleeve connects to your jacket, I don't think I would know how to make a normal shaped one anymore because now I'm accounting for shoulder and pectoral muscles that most men you won't see in tailoring. And it's almost square at some points instead of round. So.
Okay, I decided I'm going to ask my question about the tour because I took with a group several years ago the tour. I mean, and it is so fantastic. I want to do it again. And so I think it would be wonderful if enough people can make a group. But one of the reasons I wanted to change my question to that is because we did see from a distance the areas, the dormitory areas, and you can see the studios, and it's just a beautiful building.
Yeah, it
My
is.
God, it's a beautiful building.
We have dance studios on the 3rd, 4th, and 5th floor, and if you're on the 4th floor, there are windows with really deep ledges that you can sit in and look down into the studio and watch them practicing. It's really neat.
Awesome. We basically have time for one more question, so I'll go with Sarah because I saw you have your hand up. And
We have time to stick around for folks to
Yeah,
maybe
I'll
ask you other
definitely lunch.
questions. Okay, so she won't leave you in the lurch with your questions.
As far as getting into a career in costume manufacturing, what was the path you took to do that?
I started sewing when I was about 7, just because my mom taught me, because I don't know why, she just did. And I actually didn't really have much of an interest in fashion design. I had an interest in history. And a lot of costumes are based in history, and it's the prettiest part of history. And so when I was getting ready to go off to college, I really didn't know what I wanted to do. And my mom pointed out that there was a costume design program at Shenandoah University, which is connected to a music school. And I went and I got my 4-year BFA there. When I graduated, I was kind of sitting on the fence about whether I wanted to be a designer, whether I wanted to be a technician. Designer was much more fun. Technicians, there's a lot more job stability. You get to stay in one spot. I did some overhire work in the Washington, D.C. area. And then I did an internship with the Juilliard School in New York, which came in handy when applying for the job at the Houston Ballet, because one of the designers I assisted there had just finished designing a show for the ballet. Then I went to grad school, and I got a master's in costume technology from the University of Texas, and it was just focused on the building. It was just focused on pattern making and crafts, because by then I knew I didn't want to be a designer. I wanted to build stuff for a living. And felt like staying in Texas. I applied for the job at the ballet, said I had worked with Fritz Maston, and they went, "Oh, we know Fritz, we'll give him a call." So I ended up here.
Awesome. Thank you so much.